Under what circumstances would you disobey a super injunction?
I've had quite a lot of this online. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, if you were a real journalist, you would have just said it. You would have just put it out there.
I think that'd have been good because you'd be in prison now.
I'd be in prison.
I wouldn't have to deal with you anymore.
The clink agents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll be the librarian, of course, very quickly. Try and find something to do.
No,
Try and keep my head down.
You'd be in the kitchen peeling potatoes.
Oh, no. Well, you know what? They'd quickly. As my wife would testify. They would quickly sack me.
Welcome to a special Q&A episode of the Newsagents. This extraordinary week following the Afghan data breach and all the court cases that Lewis has been at the centre of for the last 2 years. And we start with a question from Dan Bracken-Neal on Spotify. Although the data breach and super injunction were bad, why have the Labour government decided not to continue helping Afghan people who helped the UK?
It's a great question, Dan, and one that if you've listened to our interview with John Healey, which we did on Tuesday night, you will have heard me put to him. I think the reason is that the government feels that given that thousands and thousands of people have been brought to the UK, at least 7,000 of whom would never have been brought to the UK were it not for the fact they were on the data set, they probably wouldn't have been eligible. If you ask John Healey about it, and he basically said this to us at a sort of secret briefing that we had on Monday night with the sort of relevant journalists in the sort of heart of Ministry of Defence, because we were pressing him on this then. And he said, look, it can't be the case that we have a complete liability or debt to 100,000 people. We're not in a position to take that many people from Afghanistan. And I think, that is a legitimate position. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people will find curious the fact, and I certainly find curious, that, as I said, and I've been saying all week, I sat in that courtroom for 2 years, and government lawyer after government lawyer after government lawyer said that the Secretary of State believed, and that was initially Grant Shapps and then John Healey, the Secretary of State's position was that if knowledge of this data set ever became known to the Taliban, it would represent existential lethal risk to the people involved. And I do think, therefore, it is curious that on the day that we know for a fact it became known to the Taliban, maybe they knew before, but we know for a fact that they knew on Tuesday because John Healey got up in the House of Commons and told them and the rest of the world, you might think it's a bit curious that it was on that day that we decided to close the scheme which was designed to help people affected by the breach.
Lewis, you used the word secrecy. And in this episode, we're going to try to explore as much as we can through your questions the way the secrecy was imposed and enforced and the mechanisms used to do so. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Lewis.
And if you're watching this, you'll see that Lewis is dressed for court and I am dressed for the beach.
I am not dressed for court. This is not my court wear. I wear the gown and wig. They had to tell me to take it off.
He'll be appearing with a horsehair wig before long. This will be the latest kind of iteration of Lewis Goodall. Right, let us start on this extraordinary week. And this is a really great question because it absolutely goes to the heart of so many different aspects. It's from Owen and it says, "Hi Newsagents. I'm curious about the process of preparing to report on a story that's subject to a super injunction. Were there legal hoops you had to jump through in order to record your special report in front of your production team while the super injunction was still in place? Similarly, at what point was Lewis able to even share that all this was going on with John and Emily? And secondly, this is a multi-layered question. Secondly, I feel like the majority of the chatter I've seen about this story online beyond the initial reporting has been tedious anti-immigrant rhetoric. Do you think the core issue of this outrageous use of a super injunction has actually hit home with the public? Fantastic work on this story, Owen."
Well, thanks for your questions, Owen. Take the first one because it's more straightforward. Although it wasn't straightforward in a way, actually doing it. Yeah, it was difficult to report on the story while the super injunction was in place. Again, just to emphasise, this was a very unusual position for any journalist to be in because a super injunction had never been applied to journalists working on political stories like this. So time and time again, and the judge was, I think, conscious of this. Ministry of Defence didn't really care about it, but the judge was very conscious that we involved in the case, and again, it wasn't, by the end of it, wasn't just me. There were a fantastic team of different journalists, all of us working together on the story. We all had to kind of, as we went through, grapple with how we could tell a story and prepare the story while still obeying the terms of the super injunction. So in practical terms, there are all sorts of things journalistically that you would normally do that you weren't allowed to do. So one of the things that kept coming up in the case, and the judge was actually asking for this from us at various points, the judge was kind of desperate for evidence that the Taliban might already know about the leak or have the data set already. Because, of course, if they did, then he could just discharge it straight away. There would be no case to keep it. And indeed, we thought that that was probable and credible. But the way that you would go about confirming that, of course, you can't ask the Taliban directly, but you could definitely ask people in Afghanistan. You could ask people in the Ministry of Defence. You could ask people who have got connections to the country. You can ask people, Afghans living in the UK. But you can't do it because you're under the terms of the super injunction. So what it wasn't just the judge called it a freeze or a freeze on democracy and on scrutiny. It was basically also putting journalism into cold storage as well, or at the very least placing a sort of set of bars, a sort of iron bars around you, because you were just not able to do the things you would normally do on any story.
So I remember you a while back calling Emily and me together and saying, look, there's something I've got to tell you. Now, and you told us the bare bones of the story.
Yeah.
This was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
I mean, how did that come about?
Well, it came about because by the time you had a couple of extra sort of parties onto the case, we kept saying, because of course, theoretically, this super injunction could come to an end at any time. Either because we got that evidence that the Taliban already knew about it, or maybe the government decided to drop it, or something could just happen. They kept referring to it in court as a break glass moment, that there would be some event or something would happen. Maybe someone would report it. Someone would not realise the injunction was in place and could have just reported it, which easily could have happened. A foreign press organisation, say the New York Times, which would not be subject to the injunction, could have reported it any time, in which case the injunction, theoretically at least, should have been lifted. So we were saying to them, look, we've got to put things in place to be able to report this story. And that means telling some of our colleagues, particularly for us, because we were the only broadcaster, podcaster, whatever, involved in the case. Everyone else was newspapers, which is a little bit easier to prepare. You can write your copy and get it ready and all those sorts of things. Whereas for us, it's more difficult, right? Funnily enough, weirdly enough, I don't really know, like you, John, how to operate the sort of quite complicated. Well, I'm sure it can't be that hard. They're all looking behind the glass like it's very difficult. I'm sure it's not that hard, but we don't know how to do that, right? So we have technical requirements. So we basically, I got permission from the judge to tell senior people involved on the program, including you and Emily. In fact, there's quite a funny moment when the judge started going through the sort of people he'd approved to tell, and he said, yes, I've given permission to Ms. Maitlis, and I've given permission to Mr. Goodall to tell Ms. Maitlis and Mr. Sopel, whom I know, by the way, I know their show, or know of us anyway. And he sort of read the names out, and so that's when I was able to tell you.
I suppose the other thing about it, which is worth sort of talking about, which is, if you work in TV news or even on a newspaper, and there is a big infamous murder trial about to take place, you've probably got a year between charges being laid and the initial court appearance and the trial. And in that period, if you know it's going to be a huge story, you've got the rival networks bidding for interviews with key family members, and you will record those interviews in readiness for the verdict to be delivered. But of course, you were completely unable to go to ministers or senior civil servants because you would have been breaching the terms of the super injunction. So when you say journalism was put in cold storage as well, the normal course of events for us, you get a story, you try to stand it up. You try to find out who knew what and when. You try to find out whether there was any pushback. All those things are part of normal journalistic practice, so that when you report it, you've got a complete picture.
Yeah,
and you were completely unable to do that.
Indeed. So, here's another good example. Something that's come up this week, and we talked about on our show yesterday. The ISC, the Intelligence Security Committee, were not informed. That was something that was discussed in court at some length, and the judge expressing his surprise that they hadn't been told. Now, normally, that would be something that would occur to me, but not least because I know a couple of the people on the committee, and I could have gone to them and said, well, why haven't you been told about this story? Are you aware of this story? Couldn't do that. Couldn't do that because I knew that they weren't injuncted, they weren't aware, and it would have been a breach of the injunction to do so. And there were other like manifestations to it as well. In the early days when there were just a couple of us who were injuncted, and initially we weren't parties to the case, so we didn't have a lawyer because we weren't initially objecting to it. Nonetheless, we were consistently being asked in court for our views on this, that, and the other as kind of media observers, to the point where, you know, myself and Holly Bancroft, who people heard from The Independent, heard from on the special episode we did, at one point were basically representing the media parties in court against the government KC, you know, for a whole day. Yeah. Now, normally if I can't think what circumstances this would happen in, but, you know, you would try and talk to people with legal expertise. You would try and get a sense of the sort of thing that might come up and the sort of thing to try and prepare. Again, you can't do that. So again and again, it sort of felt like, I mean, we talked about this in the special episode, but so many of the cards were just stacked in the government's favour because they had sort of complete power to determine what we did at every step.
And I know we're going slightly beyond Owen's question here, but there was one other bit that I just wanted to ask about, which is, you know, I've done court reporting. I've been at the Royal Courts of Justice. I've done the Old Bailey. I've done, also, you know, when I was in local radio, you were forever doing court cases. You talked about hearings in secret. Now, we know as part of court reporting that if the jury isn't sworn in, you can't report on that because that's not got privilege. But I don't know what a secret court is. What happens?
Well, so there's basically three layers to it. There are three ways in which the three sessions or sort of states of being in the court can be. And one is public, and that is
which is when general members of the public
anyone
can go in.
And the press can go.
Yeah.
And within the limits of the court reporting system, they can report what happens there. Actually, the very first public bit of this entire case took place yesterday for about 10 minutes. But and the very first thing that happened is the judge sat down and the government KC said, we need to go into closed immediately, my lord. And closed is the sort of most extreme other version, is the court then goes and sits in private, but there's private open, which is when the parties to the case, i.e. us in this case, can be part of the proceedings, but no member of the public can be part of the proceedings. So the court is sitting privately and the door is literally locked to the courtroom. But then even within that, the secret within the secret is the closed session of the private session, which is when state security and security matters are being discussed. And even the other parties to the case, even our lawyer, even our KC, couldn't be part of it. Now, we did have someone there representing us, which is someone called a special advocate, that the court appoints to represent your interests for that bit of the hearing that you can't be at. But the funny thing is, John, about the special advocate, and this was another funny thing, when we were given a special advocate, there was this time-limited period when we could talk to them, when we could represent our views and they could talk back to us. But after a certain point, I can't remember exactly what that point was, but after a certain point, basically, the communication stops, or at least it becomes one way. We can keep feeding things into them and telling them what we want them to say. They can't say anything back to us, our special advocates, because they cannot tell us what has happened in the closed session. So it is a very clandestine, very shady operation.
So your legal counsel, who was a KC, a King's Counsel, which means they've taken silk and they're at the top of the profession, they're not allowed in.
No.
It's only
a special advocate
who is presumably got full security clearance.
Yeah, there's a sort of small group of special KCs who in cases with regard that concern national security can operate within the court. But it was a very, very weird process. And like I said in the episode the other day, or alluded to the other day, the only person who really decides when they go into closed session, I mean, technically it's the judge, but very often the judge was reluctant to go into closed session. And all the government KC says is, we must, my lord, we must go into closed session because I can't discuss what I'm going to discuss with you in open. And usually he acquiesced because he didn't really have much choice.
Well, let's go on to the next question, which is from Ozcats, who wrote to us on X. Under what circumstances would you disobey a super injunction?
I've had quite a lot of this online. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, if you were a real journalist, you would have just said it. You would have just put it out there.
I think that'd have been good because you'd be in prison now.
I'd be in
I wouldn't have to deal with you anymore.
The Clink agents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll be the librarian, of course, very quickly. Try and find something to do.
No,
Try and keep my head down.
You'd be in the kitchen peeling potatoes.
Oh, no. Well, you know what? They'd quickly. As my wife would testify. They would quickly sack me. Under what circumstances would you disobey a super injunction? I don't know. I mean, like I say, someone pointed out to me the other day that there are actually only a very, very small number of people who have ever been subject to a super injunction because they're so rare, right? They're obviously very rare journalistically on matters such as this. It's never happened before. But even the ones that have been applied about privacy, they're quite rare. The courts have generally been quite reluctant to apply them and to grant them because they do sit so uncomfortably with the principles of open justice, which are supposed to sit at the heart of the British legal system. So it's quite a rare conundrum to be in. I mean, the truth is, that's the question. I mean, I can only think about it with regards to this case. And obviously I did think about the fact that it was going on so long. I mean, initially, I just assumed that it would be quite a short period, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. I initially thought that at some point, so many people, one of the ridiculous things is, we've heard Grant Shapps on the radio this morning saying he didn't want to tell the Intelligence and Security Committee because he wanted to keep the kind of circle small. Like, that's just bollocks, like in the sense that so many people knew about this. I'm amazed it didn't get out there. The judges said he's amazed that it didn't get out there. He assumed, I think, that this situation would be taken off him because it would just get out there somehow. Hundreds and hundreds of officials knew about this, John. Because even before the super injunction was put in place, I think hundreds of officials knew about it. Not least because you think about, as we've been reporting all week, there was a mass covert program to relocate thousands and thousands of people. You can't do that. That's not just one man and his dog. That is a huge number of officials and civil servants coordinating, executing that policy. So the fact, and we know that, the data set was out there. It was in a Facebook group with, I think, 900 members. So the fact that it didn't get out there kind of did make me start to think after 2 years. I mean, I remember talking about it with our editor at one point. And his saying, I don't think you're ever going to be able to tell this story because it just kept getting extended and extended and extended. And it did make you think, if this went on for 3 years, 4 years, it puts you in a conundrum, right? But the truth is, it is quite a thing when you get handed, like, literally a piece of paper in a brown envelope and it says this is a contramundum injunction, and if you breach it, then you could face 10 years in prison. 10 years, even more than you get for knocking down a sycamore tree. 10 years. I mean, it's something to really weigh up, right? It's quite chilling. It's quite a chilling thing to receive.
Yeah, and I think, Oz, I totally understand the kind of thinking behind your question. But we are journalists who operate within the law.
Exactly.
And
the law matters.
And the law matters. And the upholding of the law is kind of what makes us a liberal democracy where there is due process. And you look at the imprisonment of Tommy Robinson. He was told by the courts not to do something, and he stuck 2 fingers up to the court and said, I'm going to carry on. And the court said, well, fine, you've carried on, but now you're in contempt of court. And I think that we journalists can't just drive a coach and horses through it. I mean, we can make ourselves martyrs, and Lewis could end up in prison for 10 years. But we are accepting.
Free the newsagents 3.
Exactly. Mateless isn't going to prison.
No.
Come on, be real.
No.
Category
C for her.
Yeah, that we have to obey the law. There is the rule of law in this country, and there is a process which we have to go through. And, it'd be lovely just to say, we're going to stick 2 fingers up at this, but you can't, because then it becomes anarchy, and you haven't got the due process that we kind of rightly revere as us being a country of laws and process and all the rest of it.
I would like to see Emily as a sort of modern day Deirdre Rashid. And the other thing is, as well, is that, to be fair, there were and are things that were being, when I was thinking about it, you kept hearing from the government that if this got out there, it would kill a lot of people. So to have that, to take that on board and then just release the information anyway, would have been, I think, quite an act. Craig says on X, why hasn't the Speaker resigned or MPs demanding he do so? Speaker Lenthal denied the wishes of the Crown to stand up for Parliament. Speaker Hoyle failed in this duty. I do think, Craig, that the role of the Speaker, I'm glad you've actually asked this, I do think the role of the Speaker in all of this is a fascinating and interesting subplot, constitutionally and politically. I was very surprised when I heard that the Speaker had been served a super injunction. I do not understand how that sits within our constitutional system, where Parliament has privilege, but also the Speaker as the custodian of our democracy, who I think was basically being asked to make sure that questions which could have revealed the existence of the leak weren't put and that he could discourage them. I think that sits really uncomfortably with our system. And I have to say, I am surprised he has not been out this week talking about that and expressing his view. He was obviously put in a difficult position, but expressing his view as to whether a super injunction should ever be applied again. We've asked him for an interview. His office have declined. I think that at some point he needs to make his views about this entire saga known, because it had never happened before. And I think if it were to happen again, given as we've been discussing, the principles of super injunction sit so uncomfortably within our parliamentary system. If he's not going to speak out about that, who is?
Right. One more before the break. Young Towser on X says, why are you hell-bent on undermining the government and ushering in far-right reform, asking for 70% of the electorate? And I'm going to have the first stab at this.
Please
one.
do.
We're not. We are reporting, and we are trying to explain what has happened after 2 extraordinary years, and we're doing so without fear or favour. And the fact of the matter is, let me try and be high-minded again about journalism. Our job is to speak truth to power. And whether the power be Conservative or whether the power be Labour, we're trying to understand why it was a super injunction was imposed and then maintained for so long on something which had a profound public interest concern. We're not ushering in anything. We're not taking sides, but we can't just blinker ourselves if there is inconvenient news that might be bad for a Labour government, or if we were a right-wing podcast for a Conservative government. Our job is to hold power to account.
I couldn't have put it better myself. I mean, this thing I've seen online so much this week. It's pissed me off. It's irritated me. Because, as you say, John, you know what? One easy way to think about it is that if journalism doesn't occasionally ask uncomfortable questions for your own side and do things which make your side feel uncomfortable, then it isn't really journalism, and the people doing it aren't really journalists. Of course, the questions I've seen all this all week going, why are you blaming Labour for a Tory problem? Why aren't you just holding them to account? The Tories took it out. Labour maintained it. There are questions for both sides. They're different questions. We've just been through one about why Healy's the one making the decision to close the schemes for the people affected. That's not Shapps' decision. Shapps, who today was absolutely outrageously out and about claiming that he would have loved to have seen he expected the super injunction to come to an end by summer of 2024. In which case, Grant Shapps, why was it that you applied for its continuation, for it to keep going at exactly the moment when the judge in the case knocked it back? He did that in May 2024 and turned around today and said he would have expected it to come to an end by the summer of 2024. That was clearly about the timing of the general election, not security. But yeah, exactly on that. We're journalists. We're journalists. We do it without fear or favour. There are questions. This is a big constitutional story, big political story. There are questions for both sides. If that makes you feel uncomfortable, then go and listen to something else.
We'll be back after the break. Now, why is the Labour Party going to war against Diane Abbott, asks Thomas M. It's such an interesting question because you could spin the question round depending on your attitude and say, why is Diane Abbott going to war with the Labour Party? In the sense that she wrote a letter to the Observer, then recanted and said she shouldn't have done, but now she's recanted the recanting. And so we're back where we started from, and Labour said, oh, right, well, in that case, you're suspended again.
This is there are lots of layers to this story. I think.
Are there ever?
I mean, clearly, look, Diane Abbott. She obviously in saying that she didn't regret something that she had previously said she'd regretted, which was obviously the source of such controversy, rightly or wrongly, at that moment. She must have known what the reaction might be, it would have been best for everyone to simply, I think, leave it alone. That said, she obviously feels strongly, and there are lots of people who agree with her, and I do understand what she means, which is to say, I think the problem with what she said initially is when she was saying it, in the context in which she was saying it, and certainly some of the comments about, red hair and all that sort of stuff, perhaps ill-advised. I think the overall point that she says she's trying to make, which is that there's no hierarchy of racism, but racism does manifest itself differently. It is racism, if you're black, clearly can and does express itself differently than racism if you're Jewish, if you're a traveller, Irish, whatever it happens to be. That seems to me to be, I would have thought, a reasonably uncontroversial point. But this is now really beyond the substance of what she said and how she said it. It is now about the internal politics of the Labour Party and the kind of dynamics of this story.
Because just as there are those people who are thinking, how dare the Labour Party try and, kick her out, and why are the Labour Party doing this? There is a school of thought that Diane Abbott is sort of seeking this. She's very close to Jeremy Corbyn, we know. Maybe she's looking for a way to get out so she can join her friend Jeremy Corbyn in this far left party. I'm not saying that is the motivation, but there are those I know who think that she's been looking for her, cause to go to war with Keir Starmer. She's also dissatisfied with the direction of the party. She wasn't part of the original gang of four who were called in to be told, you are now the whip plus four. But she joins them anyway. And we'll see how this one pans out.
Yeah, I look, and you've got to remember, both sides in this detest each other. Yeah. I mean, Abbott absolutely, I think, loathes Starmer and the people around him. I can understand why there was never any love lost, but obviously the circumstances in which they kept delaying restoring the whip to her, obviously just trying to basically get a deal where she stood down in exchange for a peerage. That was all a really difficult.
This was before
time.
the last
This
general
was
election.
before the last general election. And that was a really difficult time, and for people around Starmer, she embodies exactly the sort of politics that they abhor, and that many of them have basically made their internal Labour Party careers about exorcising. So they wanted her out then. They thought she was a troublemaker and difficult and wanted her seat. They wanted her out then. They failed to get rid of her, partly through their own political incompetence, but nonetheless. And now this saga just keeps on running.
And so clumsily handled. For someone who does have a place in our democracy, the first black woman MP, and who's now the mother of the House of Commons as the longest serving MP.
Rob says, hi team, do you think that Trump's reluctance to release the Epstein files could have anything to do with not wishing any inconvenient revelations to emerge on behalf of an unnamed senior royal ahead of an unprecedented second state visit to the UK in September?
I don't think that. I don't think that it's to protect Prince Andrew. I don't think that is part of Donald Trump's motivation at all. I mean, the conspiracy theory that is now taking hold, following initially Donald Trump saying there's nothing to see here, then getting cross with Republicans who demanded that there was. Donald Trump starts a conspiracy theory that he then can't shut down. But the real danger is that it's coming to wash up on Donald Trump's shore himself, and these allegations that appeared in the Wall Street Journal this morning, that Donald Trump sent a letter to Jeffrey Epstein with a very lewd drawing on it to mark his birthday. Donald Trump, I should say, to quote, I think verbatim, says that to Rupert Murdoch, I am going to sue your arse off. So it's all going well at the Wall Street Journal and the White House. But I think that the danger is for Trump that, look, Trumpland created this conspiracy theory. It was given oxygen by J.D. Vance. It was given oxygen by Don Trump Jr., by Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, by Dan Bongino, the deputy director of the FBI. They were all saying there's something to see here. And now you've got Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, saying, no, it's all fine, just move on. It's not washing. It's not washing with the MAGA faithful at all.
The revolution eats its children in the end. I mean, what an extraordinary situation to be in. We've so often talked about Trump being Teflon and being untouchable, particularly during the second term, right, where he's been sort of king of all he surveys ever since the night of the election in November 2024. And yet for this, Epstein and the files and the conspiracy that, as you say, John, he helped augment and create and foster to be the thing that genuinely it feels has easily been or felt like the biggest political threat to him since his re-accession to office is stunning, even for Trump.
And you cannot kill conspiracy theories, particularly in Magaland, which has kind of been fed on the idea that there is a deep state and there is profound wrongdoing and the system is rotten. And they've all believed that the Epstein thing, powerful Democrats were involved and there must have been someone bumping Epstein off because they didn't want the truth to come out. And now you've got Trump as the person saying, no, it's all absolutely fine. He committed suicide and there was no list of clients. Maybe, but Donald Trump has not satisfied his base for the first time. And there seems to be a growing gap between Trump and Magaland. And that has not happened before.
No, never. Hedy, I think, says, why is this Labour government still so clumsy about the Israel-Gaza conflict despite ample time and opportunity to learn from the George Galloway by-election successes and clear undercurrent of painful local losses during the 2024 general election? Are their communication folks and strategists incompetent, overwhelmed, hamstrung, or just running scared of Donald Trump? Thanks for addressing. Warm regards, Hedy.
I hesitate. I think it's almost a trope when people say, have they got their communications wrong? As if it's the press officers and the PR people who are the problem. And if you think there is a problem in government, I mean, look, yeah, the government hasn't communicated well, but maybe that's because they're not getting a clear lead from the top on the way that they should be communicating or what the messages they want communicated. And so I kind of think that ultimately, and this is right, responsibility lies with the Prime Minister. I don't think it's fair to say, oh, well, the press officer at the, at the Foreign Office or the press officer at Downing Street is responsible for this confusion.
No, I think that's right. Look, I mean, obviously, the Israel-Gaza conflict is one which has been really difficult for the Labour Party. I think at the top of the government, from Starmer down, there is a horror of what they see. I think, though, that there is, I think many people would feel, and I can totally understand this, something of a gulf, or at the very least a disconnect between that horror sometimes and the language that they use. Their language has definitely hardened over time, so their policy action has definitely hardened over time. But I think that there has been, certainly in the last few weeks and months, a further hardening of opinion within the Labour Party, and actually the polling would show this as well. As long the war continuing in the way that it has, when we had that abhorrent plan from Israel Katz, the defence minister, the other day, suggesting that he would want to move the entire Palestinian population to the ruins of Rafah, a city itself that has been completely destroyed by the IDF, putting them in a camp. There's a word for that. And I think that the drumbeat, something that, even 6 months, 12 months ago, and I know people are going to get angry about this for a reason I'll say, but 6 months ago, 12 months ago, the accusation of genocide still felt fringe within politics. That, I think, increasingly is no longer the case. Now, that's not to say I'm saying that it is genocide, but I think that there is behaviour which at the very least anyone could recognise is genocide adjacent. It is a government which is showing profound indifference to the value of Palestinian life. Now, I know a lot of people listening to this saying, well, you're just catching up. We've been saying this 12 months ago. Well, the fact is that this story has developed over time. The Israeli government response has shifted and hardened and become even more extreme over time. And I think that there is a body of opinion in the Labour Party which is becoming more and more hostile, and will be putting more and more pressure on the government to harden its response further.
Let us move on. And this is a real shift in tone of a question. Anna Harrison asks, the most viral clip this week has been the couple at the Coldplay concert who were caught hugging on Kiss Cam on the big screen and ducked out of view because presumably they were having an affair. I saw the Times write this story this morning, but I was wondering whether you think this is something that should be covered by major news outlets. Is this really a public interest story worthy of our attention? I mean, it's the classic. Is the public interested? Yes. Is it in the public interest? Well, maybe, but maybe not. Look, we were all sharing it on our family WhatsApp group last night. It was very funny. And I think funnier as well because in this sort of era where, and we've seen it playing out in all sorts of forums where you cannot have relationships with someone else else is on the staff. It seemed to cost the CEO of BP his job, and this is the CEO of some tech company with the head of HR. And so really not ideal to be caught on kiss cam. But maybe if you go to a venue like that, and if you go to US sporting events,
thing is, if they'd not reacted,
yeah,
then actually no one would have ever noticed, right? It was only because they reacted in the way that they did that then people started asking questions about who they were, right, and found out that he was CEO.
I think we call this technically the Streisand effect.
It's Streisand effect, exactly. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
Where she complained about people talking about her Malibu home. And it just drew more and more attention to the Malibu home.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether, obviously, I'm not trying to drag it all back to this, I promise, but I think obviously because it's been on my mind so much, I have to say, I mean, it is obviously funny, it's very funny, but I do think it does strike me as ironic, right, that, like, I mean, you just said it, John, about what's in the public interest and what the public are interested in. Sort of a funny, it's a sort of weird world, isn't it, where, you know, you could argue that these people do have a right to privacy, and it must be particularly horrible for his wife and all of this sort of thing, you know, her privacy as well. But, you know, we're potentially living in a country now where things that are so clearly in the public interest are potentially subject to the force of law by a government to prevent their reporting. But then, you know, two people who, whatever they're doing and whatever view you might have of it, it is just ultimately their private life and certainly isn't really any of the rest of our business. It literally goes around the whole world's media, you know, in the flash of a moment, and we're all talking about it. It's a weird world.
Weird world. But at times you do need something that just makes you chuckle.
Well, that is true. I mean, they've given us all a good laugh.
Look, you know, we've just talked about Gaza. We talked about the bloody awful situation in Afghanistan.
Probably helps that he's rich as well, right?
Yeah,
he's a CEO, right?
He's
There's
the
a bit
CEO,
of that.
and it's the HR director.
Yeah, I mean, and
they're having a naughty bit of necking, and they're caught on kiss
Shall I-
cam. And if you go to an American sporting event, there is kiss cam. You must know there is going to be kiss cam.
Should we get kiss cam in the studio?
I've got to say, Lewis, that
I don't think it'll get much action, to be honest.
over the 3 years we've been doing this podcast,
We're close, but we're not that close.
I haven't seen that much kissing in the studio. I'm just going to
Not
put
yet.
it there. Leave it there.
No, it's much more seen. I'll give you a laugh if you want. I'll give you a laugh on something that happened the other day. There wasn't much in the way of laughing during this whole court proceedings, right?
Yeah,
But something did make me laugh the other day. On the final day of the case before, so it was last week, right? Everyone knew it was coming to an end, so the court was absolutely chock-a-block. Normally, it gradually just started with a few people smattering, with each time just got bigger and bigger, and it was absolute chock-a-block. And before the judge came in, right, the KC, the government KC, said, just before the judge comes in, I can see there's lots of new faces in the room. Can we just check that everybody who's here is supposed to be here? And yeah, you're here. And they say, oh yeah, I'm from the Home Office. Oh right, I'm from the Ministry of Defence. Oh, I'm from MHCLG. All right, okay, fine.
What? So there were no checks?
That was it. It was literally, is everybody here supposed to be here at this top secret trial, which has gone on for 2 years and cost tens of millions of pounds? Is that all right? Yeah, everyone here, fine. Okay, right. I'm just sat there thinking, is that it? Is that the extent of the top secret government security checks in this place? I mean, like, honestly, it's little moments like that reminded you. Every time you're like, I'm sat there thinking, are we descending into autocracy? No, it's fine. It's Britain, because actually, fundamentally, the British state is too incompetent to ever actually pull that off. So there's something to think about.
We'll be back after the break.
Well, I've got another final question here, and I'm sorry that due to the incompetence of our editor, we don't know who it's from because he just missed it off the page. So apologies to you out there. Why are so many people freaking out about 16 and 17-year-olds having the vote? We have it in Scotland and Wales, and it's great. Sometimes it feels like England can be a little hysterical. Thanks for this question, whoever you are.
What? Us? Hysterical?
Never!
Going mad? Hyperventilating when there's absolutely nothing to hyperventilate about?
You're listening to the wrong podcast if you don't like that stuff, believe me.
We do. I mean, it's ridiculous hyperventilation, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know, there are a number of other countries where this has been adopted. If you were to change the voting age in America, presumably you'd need a constitutional amendment, would you?
Yeah, you would. Yeah.
You would. I mean, it is funny that you can just do it by changing the law and 16, 17-year-olds can vote.
I think that's true, actually. Are you definitely... I don't know if the Constitution does mandate that. It definitely mandates the age at which you can be a candidate.
Yes, and wage you can be a presidential candidate and all that.
I wonder, is that...
Yeah. Don't know. We don't know.
Anyway. I'll look that up. Yeah, I think this is like, I don't understand why people get so exercised about this. Like, I neither think it will be an absolute fillip for our democracy, and nor do I think that it will be a catastrophe for our democracy. Basically, it seems the age of majority with regards to politics is reasonably subjective. There's a strong case for leaving it as it is. I think there's a strong case, and I would actually favour reducing it to 16 because the arguments that have been put forward over the last 24 hours, I think in opposition to it, are hysterical. And it reminds me, whether it is conscious or otherwise, they are the arguments that have been put forward every time there is the proposal to extend the franchise. Whether it's women, whether it's working class men and women, when it was 21 to 18 in the 70s, it's they can't handle it, they don't want it, they'll abuse it, they'll ruin the system. Those are the arguments that have been put forward every single time in the 1880s, in 1918, 1930, and 1928. It happened again and again and again with every extension of the franchise. And each time, guess what? Usually, actually, the injection of new voters into the system has neither actually particularly transformed our electoral demography. It hasn't transformed the outcomes of elections, and nor has it in any fundamental way undermine the system. When people say, oh, there are 16, 17-year-olds that they can't handle voting, or they're not bright enough to vote. We had Liz Truss as Prime Minister.
Elected by people who are members of the Conservative Party, political activists.
Who are usually about 105. So honestly, I think that we can all relax. I think there will be some 16, 17-year-olds who don't vote. Some will make a stupid decision, and some will make the right decision for them, which is literally like every other voter.
England, take a chill pill. We'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.